This part of our property is not very useful. Well, at least it wasn't at the beginning of the season. Hey y'all, welcome back to the Big Bear Homestead. So we haven't done a proper garden tour since the season started, and part of that is because we've been so busy planting everything that we haven't really had a chance to take the camera out and say, okay, this is what's going on. So I'm gonna go ahead and walk you through today and kind of show you what we have growing, what we plan on growing, and kind of some snags that we've hit, some successes we have, and at any point, if you see anything or you have any suggestions on something that you see that we could do differently, definitely put those in the comments below. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm gonna start over here on the very edge of our property and work our way back. This part of our property is not very useful. Well, at least it wasn't at the beginning of the season. And that was because there's a huge drop off right here. And we were going to build a kind of like a platform to where we could sit down and kind of enjoy the scenery and everything. And what we realized is that that would be a waste of space. So what we did is we had all of these old barrels from feed and water and from working at the dairy, and so Jason took all of them. Now granted, they're not pretty, but they're functional. We cut all of these barrels up and we put potatoes in them. And so as you can see behind me, there's this whole length of nothing but potato plants. And then we also have a little bit further down that way, there's actually some wasabi radish in those. Now things look a little kind of sad right at the moment because we're right at, it's probably 2 o'clock in Georgia, finally in the summer, right? Because the weather up until now has been like in the 70s and 80s this past week. And we finally hit in the 90s today. So a couple of my plants are kind of like, we need some water, feed us. No, but we're getting ready to top dress with mulch on a bunch of these beds. So hopefully that water situation won't be a problem moving forward. This bed right here, I have Tomatillos, and I also have a couple of ground cherries in here. We're trying to do companion planting with all of these beds. So in this bed, I have Tomatillos and peppers. And then across the trellis, I'm going to start adding more tomato plants so we can see about growing them vertically up the cattle panels. And then over here in all of these square beds, last year when we grew stuff in the square beds, we wasted space. We had tomatoes in the middle, and then they took over the whole bed. And so then the basil was competing with the tomatoes and the peppers, and it was just a mess. So this year I had this idea. I decided that we were getting ready to do the Suscovich tractors, and they call for conduit. And so when we went to go get the conduit, I had an idea. So Jason, is there any way that we can cut the conduit in half, because then that would be 5-foot pieces, and just run some welded wire fence up the back of it? He's like, well, why would you want to do that? And I was like, well, that way I would then have some vertical support for some tomatoes to crawl up the back side of the beds. So then that way I can use the whole rest of the bed for other stuff. So now these little 3x3 or 3.5 by 3.5 square beds will actually produce more food. So that's what we're trying all along this row. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 beds, and those 6 beds all have 3 tomato plants going across the back side to climb up the fence. And then I have peppers and basil in this one, and then peppers, and I haven't decided what I'm going to put. I'm probably going to put cilantro in this next bed. And then I have tomatoes and some really fancy ruffle basil, purple basil in that bed. And the next one is tomatoes, peppers, and we'll put something else. The next one, this is pretty interesting. So I told you we're doing some companion beds, right? Well, everybody knows tomatoes, peppers, basil, tomatoes, peppers, oregano. Well, did you know that both mint and lemongrass are also companions of tomatoes? So in this bed, we acquired some lemongrass plants. So we put 2 lemongrass, and then the mint was actually growing up from last year in the bed. So when I found out that I could put tomatoes in it, I now have tomatoes in that bed as well. So I'm really interested to see how this bed does already with having the mint and the lemongrass in it. And then the very last one has tomatoes, peppers, and stevia. Stevia is also something that is compatible with tomatoes and peppers. The one thing, and I keep saying peppers, but if you look in the beds, there aren't any peppers yet. I planted seed, but the problem that I'm running into is because of this crazy weather that we've had, the soil's not hot enough yet for the tomato or for the pepper seeds to germinate. So they're taking a little bit longer than normal. I know they're still in there, but just as a backup, I have started some pepper plants and tomato plants inside in our brooder room, so that, because it's 90 degrees in there. So in that way, it is the perfect temperature for everything to germinate. So we kind of have a fail-safe just in case. If we do see these pepper plants pop up, we'll just take those peppers and tomatoes out into the big garden. Now, here's our next bed. We're over here on the other side, we had the tomatillos. On this side, I did have a full bed of nothing but bush beans. Now you are gonna see there's a couple of bean plants still sitting in here, and that's because they're still producing. But the majority of them have already stopped. We've pulled the plants up, harvested all the beans, canned about 5 quarts, and now we're replanting bush beans again in this bed. Now, that brings me to a question that I have for all of you. All of you that grow beans, do you grow bush beans or do you grow pole beans? Or do you grow both? And why? One thing that I'm finding here is that this whole bed, I had like 150 plants in here, but I still only ended up with 5 quarts of beans. Now that may be a lot, I don't know, it may not be a lot, but to me it wasn't as productive as I would have liked it to be. And again, I will be replanting, well I have replanted, waiting for everything to come up out of the ground again because of the temperature. But I'm almost leaning towards steering away from bush beans, except for some of the novel ones like the dragon's tongue and the borletto, like the tongues of fire, those with the streaks in them, because they're pretty. But for production purposes, I feel like the pole bean is the better way to go. So I'd really be interested to hear what your ideas are on that. Now, in this bed, we just top dressed because we just harvested all of our garlic. I'll show you in a second. We got a ton of garlic from our harvest this year. This bed obviously looks pathetic. It is our Swiss chard from the spring. In the morning time, these are all up and over and everything's great. In the heat of the day, they start to fall over. But why would I leave this bed like this? Well, we're trying to save the seeds from these plants because of how well they did. And we have all of these seed heads up here that we're just waiting for them to mature so that we can save them. One thing I've read is that saving Swiss chard seeds, it takes a little bit longer. So because we have so many beds, we can afford to leave this bed alone and let it just do its thing. These 2 next beds over here, the orange bed and the blue bed, they had stuff in them. They had peas in them. We've since harvested all that. It's time. We've top dressed everything, and it's time for me to really get busy and start making more plants over here. Now, over in this bed, we've got a whole lot of craziness going on. I have tomatoes across the back. Then I have some pineapple sage, some lemongrass, some regular garden sage, some Thai basil, some more lemongrass, some purple basil, and then I have some poblano peppers across the front. At least I think they're poblanos. Gotta really get better at labeling. Then this bed is I'm really excited about. I have cucumbers growing across the trellis. I think there's like 19 varieties of cucumbers. The only one that I planted more than once was the dragon eggs, and that's because we absolutely love those. We've had a couple that we've harvested so far, but for the majority, everything's still kind of growing up over the trellis. We also planted dill across the front here, and because it's so hot right now, they're a little weepy. I also have some calendula and some marigolds here in the front as well, and they're starting to pop up and do their thing. Got them started a little late, but because of the weather the way that it is, it's been okay. In these two beds, I have okra, regular green okra in this bed, and then I have some red and orange okra in this one. I'm pretty sure they'll cross-pollinate, but it'll be okay. We're all right with that. On this side, we have radishes, tons of radishes. I used my speed, or not my speed, I always want to call it speed, my seed square that does spacing for square foot gardening. Absolutely love that thing. I think I'm going to do a video on it specifically, but we have French breakfast, Malagas. There's quite a few different types of radishes, but really our favorite has been the French breakfast. So I think, like, for the most part, these are French breakfast. There may be a few other options in there. I also have some squash across the middle and zucchini. They're starting to come up and do their thing. And then across the back on this trellis, I have different beans, pole beans. A lot of them didn't come up, so I'm getting ready to replant some of these, but I'm also in the beds up there that I said I really got to get started on. I'm going to probably put pole beans there on both sides. And when I say pole beans, I mean long beans. They're going to be the Chinese Thai, purple Thai, long bean, things like that, because they grow long and slender, and they're supposed to be really good snapping beans. And because they're pole beans, you can continue to harvest them throughout the summer. So I'm looking for those to be a good heavy producer here in probably about 2 months. Right here, this is our onion and garlic drying rack. Jason and Blaze built this for me a couple years ago, thinking we would use it then, and we never did. Well, we put it up underneath in the crawl space, hoping one day we would use it, and lo and behold, here it is in use. So we have a lot of different varieties of garlic, and then several spring onions that we pulled out because I didn't thin them really well, so they've only turned into spring onions as opposed to full-blown onions, which is fine because they all cook the same to me. This bed was a nightmare. When we had all of our tomatoes that were dying in the seed room because we were waiting to get them out, and we never got them out, we finally did a last-ditch effort and said, just put them in the ground. If they make it, they make it. If they don't, they don't. Well, look behind me. They made it. Not only did they make it, they made it all over each other. So I wasn't thinking when I was doing this bed, I thought for design purposes that, you know, tomato, pepper, tomato, pepper, tomato, pepper, tomato, pepper, right? Well, the problem with that is that by putting them along each sides of the beds, I've now created just a mess for myself. So I really didn't want to have to put fencing across both sides, but that's really the only way that I'm going to be able to support these and them not crawl all each over and just make a mess for each other, right? So we have a ton of tomatoes on this side, a ton of tomatoes on this side, and a couple of pepper plants here and there in the middle. They still seem to be doing well, so I'm just going to leave them alone. I did have one plant that looked like it wasn't going to get enough sunlight at all, even after tying up all of the tomatoes. So I moved it over to a different bed, and I went ahead and watered it in, and it seems to be jumping back pretty good from transplant shock. It's okay now. So the tomato plants are looking good. I try to come in and prune these guys, but you know how tomatoes are. Once they get away from you, they get away from you, right? And that's what happened in this bed. I had some volunteers, and so I dug them up and put them in this bed, again with the intention of putting up some kind of support so that they could grow vertically. As you can see, that didn't happen. I'm still getting tomatoes, still getting good tasty paste tomatoes, but this is kind of my bed where I'm just like, just gonna let it happen. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. These two beds over here are eggplants. I have little fingers in both of these, and then I have like a Rosita Blanco or something like that in this one, and then the Turkish orange in this one. There is some oregano in here, but again, because of the heat right now, they're not doing all that great, but they'll bounce back in a couple of hours when it starts to cool down and we water everybody. It'll be good. But we're gonna top dress that with some mulch, and that should help with the moisture issue. This bed right here, this one had all of those spring onions I was talking about, but we've since harvested those, top dressed, and this bed's ready to plant. This one, we had regular mustards and then Japanese red mustard. We've since harvested those, and we are doing a video on how to save seed on those. Be looking for that here probably within the next week or two. This part of the bed though, however, is not ready. These are collards, and as you can see, like, the seed pods on these are pretty stealthy, so I'm really waiting for these to completely dry up so that we can save these seeds, because these did really well this year, so I really want to make sure we save some seed from those. We have another bed. Let me get past this seed pod. We have another bed over here with some tomatoes, but on this one I did plant them on the edge over here. I just haven't put up the vertical support yet, which I will do probably within the next day or two. And then there's some purple basil down here in the front, and they seem to be doing really well. There's also some cilantro down in there, and it seems to be doing okay as well. So the last little bit of the tour, let's see. So I started a tea garden over here, and a lot of these are perennials, so they'll continue to come back. I have chamomile, which looks really sad right now, but it does have some of the little flowers on it. I have some echinacea, different types of echinacea in here. There's bee balm, there's lemon balm, there's some mint. Let's see what else. Lavender, and I think that's it. Bee balm, chamomile. So yeah, so there's quite a few herbs in here that can be used for tea. So hopefully those guys will start to produce really well, and we'll be able to get some of that and save it for tea. The last little bit over here, there's these 4 beds that obviously don't have anything in them yet. My idea is to plant, or to go ahead and fill these up with some dirt, soil, and put some kind of vertical support, almost like a teepee, and grow some pole beans or something that's going to grow vertically, probably more pole beans, up into kind of a teepee formation, so that we can maximize, because we eat a lot of green beans. So I'm hoping to be able to do that as well there. Don't judge me on my dying kale. We still have kale in this bed. I was hoping to harvest some in the morning time when they're still nice and crisp. Right now they're really freaking out because it's hot outside, but first thing in the morning they're nice and crisp. So I'm probably going to just take one morning, probably tomorrow morning, clip them, and then we're probably going to try and ferment those, and then maybe dehydrate some into making some kale chips. This last bed over here, I have some more spring onions, and then also a little bit of rosemary. I have to add, I got some clippings from Naked Gardener, and I've got to put those in there as well. This is our last bed right here, where we still have some garlic, and the only reason we haven't harvested it yet is because, as you could see, my rack was full. So Jason's either going to build me another rack, or I'm just gonna wait till those cure and then pull these. In the middle of this, besides weeds, which I got to get in here and clean out, There's also quite a few echinacea plants in here. I'm eagerly waiting for those to bloom. I'm pretty excited to see the different varieties that we planted. And then that's pretty much it. We've had a couple of volunteers show up. We have right here within the garlic bed, there's a loofah, imagine that. And then I also have some sweet potatoes from this bed last year, which right now, as you can see, is just basically a catch-all for when we have some grass, clippings, some weeds, just kind of composting it all in to try and richen up this bed to be able to use in the fall. And in the process, we also had some of our birdhouse gourds. They rooted in here. I think we maybe tripped and fell and dropped a few seeds in here. So now I have some birdhouse gourds trying to take over my porch. So, but I don't have the heart to rip them up. I'm just go ahead and let them grow, see what happens, right? So that's our Grow Foods, Not Lawns garden tour for this week. Hopefully in a week or two, when I have some more things sprouting, definitely bring you along where you can check out and see all of that. In the meantime, I'm going to get with my handy dandy notebook, look through my notes, and decide what we need to plant in all of these empty beds. And once I get that done, I'll definitely check back with you guys and let you know how that's going. So thanks for spending your time with me today. I know it was a little bit long-winded, but like I said, we haven't done an official garden tour yet, so this was it. I thank each and every one of you for continuing to support the Big Bear Homestead. If this is your first time, man, hit the like button and don't forget the bell. Thanks for stopping by the Big Bear Homestead. God bless and have a nice day.